The headline read, "Serial Killer in Oregon." Could I have just read that article and gone about my day? No, of course not. And if you know me, you know I'm going to ask, well, what's the evidence? And I've got questions. So down the rabbit hole I went. Hopefully I can save some other people some time going down that rabbit hole and some worry. And I hope it's interesting for you. Let's look at this story and what's really there. Let's start with Portland Police. They put out a statement saying they've been hearing questions and concerns about the death investigations. Anytime there's a sudden unexpected death, the police have to investigate. Even if it doesn't look suspicious, even if they think they know what happened, things that maybe look like an accident turn out to be a homicide. So they have to look. So when you hear they're being investigated, well, the answer in your head is, yeah, of course. Widely distributed social media posts and news media articles appeared to suggest a connection between them. These discussions have led to some anxiety and fear in our community. Yes, of course it has. And we want to provide reassurance that the speculation is not supported by the facts available at this time. There are several things here in that one little sentence. We want to reassure because they don't want people panicking, because then the police are going to get flooded with calls that aren't related to anything. They don't want a community in panic. And they're saying the speculation is not supported by the facts available at this time. So they're not saying, no, it's absolutely not related. And they're saying, but we're not saying it is. They can't come out and say one way or another until they actually know, until they actually have facts to support an assertion one way or the other. And they don't. Could the police be wrong? Could there be a serial killer and the police are wrong? Yeah, it's possible. And there are some infamous examples. A more recent infamous example is Bruce MacArthur in Toronto, Ontario, Canada, where people in the community were saying, for a long time in the gay community, were saying, something's wrong. There's something wrong here. All these guys are going missing. And nobody really listened to them. And there was, in fact, a serial killer on the loose, and nobody was taking the community seriously. So can they be wrong? Yeah. One of the tools that police have, both in Canada and the United States and other places around the world, are linkage analysis tools. So in Canada, we have ViClass, and that system has been adopted by some states in the United States. I believe UK, Australia, Belgium, a couple other places. And the FBI has ViCap. It's a similar system where information is put into a database and it's analyzed so that if a criminal is operating in different jurisdictions, that those linkages can be made. With those linkage analysis systems, just like with DNA and fingerprints, something has to be in the database in order to have something to compare to. So if you've never been fingerprinted and you commit a crime, well, your fingerprints aren't in the database for them to compare if your fingerprint is found at the scene. So some people are saying, wow, DNA will just fix that. Well, it depends. First, the person fingerprints or DNA have to be in the system. It has to be found on the scene. And this sort of evidence can get degraded depending on where the evidence is and what kind of environmental factors it's subject to. It can be impacted by, whether or not the offender took countermeasures. And as far as VICAP and VICLASS go, with VICLASS, there is a 38-page booklet that has to be filled out by investigators and then inputted into the system. And then there's an analyst on the other side who looks at it. It's a big pain in the butt. And so sometimes they get behind. Sometimes things don't get put into system. Sometimes there's a backlog. And so why am I telling you this? I'm telling you this for a couple of reasons. One, it's not as simple as punching in something into a computer and saying, oh, look, here's the bad guy's name and address, and we're going to go get him now. It doesn't go like that. The other reason I'm telling you about that is to try to illustrate that making a link is not that simple. You require a lot more than simple geography or even MO. So when the police say, we don't have enough yet to say there's a link, well, they don't have enough yet to say there's a link. It's early days in investigations, and they're looking at it. Are they talking between jurisdictions? Yeah, they're supposed to. That's a good idea. It doesn't mean that there's something huge going on. It means that they're checking, and they should check. And so that's good. So that should actually make people feel better rather than cause them to worry. Now, I'm not saying they're not connected. I'm not saying they are. We're going to look at this. And because there are so many variables that come together to indicate that there is a link or to rule out linkages, there's no way that we could go through all of it. And every victim and every offender and every situation, environment, geography, all of that, they're all different. And behavior is going to depend on the interaction between the victim, the offender, the environment, and the time frame. So what's going on, different triggers and that sort of thing. So even if an offender, say, prefers a certain type of victim, say they prefer short redheads, and that type of victim isn't available, well, some offenders will say, okay, well, I'm going to just find somebody else then. And others will say, yeah, I'm going to wait until I can get my preferred victim. Some will use the same MO all the time. And MO and signature are two different things. But studies have shown that MOs can change. Not only across time as an offender learns, but also across situations. So that something that an MO is different doesn't mean that they're not linked, that it's the same, doesn't necessarily mean that they are. So I think I'm rambling a bit here. I could talk about all these things all day long and you guys would all be asleep. So I'm going to just move on. We have 6 different victims, all female, all adult, all found within 100-mile radius. So approximately. So we're looking at 100 square miles. That's a big radius. And, when I read that, I thought, and there's only 6 then? Because it's not actually that unusual to find somebody deceased outside. That happens. And it doesn't necessarily point to a serial killer. And take into consideration the population of that 100-mile radius. We're not talking about 6 people in a small town. We're talking about 6 people across a large area in a very populated place. That doesn't mean that they're not connected, but by itself, it doesn't mean that they are. I think one of the things that got people's attention is the time frame. They were all found within, I think it's 3 months. So they were all found within a short period of time. And I think that gets people's attention. I think if they were spread out, it might not have popped up on the radar of people who are speculating about this. Okay, that's fair. We'll keep going. So in looking at the number of victims in that radius and that they were all found in a short period of time, I want to make a point. The time they were found and when they died are two different things, and it is important to find out. The other important thing is to look at if you can figure out the order in which these things happened and the time frame in which the actual death occurred. So is this something that is escalating? Is it at a particular interval? So there's all kinds of things you look at there to see, if maybe there's a link, to see if there's a change in behavior, offender behavior, to see if there's a change in victim type, also to see if there's any crossover. So did all these victims all, I don't know, go to the same gym? Did they all attend the same geographical area? That sort of thing. So you're looking for those overlaps. In looking at the 6 that we have that some media is reporting as being connected, there's one that can be eliminated right away. And that's the unidentified woman. And so Portland police say another of the cases that is being listed in the group involves a death investigation on April 24th, 2023. Officers responded to a report of someone found deceased inside a tent, and they called in the medical examiner. And the medical examiner says there is no indication that foul play was suspected. So the officers who were there to assist and the Portland homicide unit has not become involved in the investigation. So you can't say that that's as a result of a serial killer when the death wasn't even suspicious in the first place. So we've gone from 6 down to 5. So let's look at the 5 that are left. We have Kristin Smith, Joanna Speaks, Charity Perry, Bridget Webster, and Ashley Reel. They range in age from 22 to 32. So we're looking at all female. They're all white except for Ashley, who is Hispanic, and 2 of them have reddish hair, 2 have brown hair, and 1 has black hair. This matters. If there's a link, it matters because some offenders prefer a certain type. The fact that they're young tells you something about the offender. The fact that they are all thin build, like they're not big women. So Kristin was 5'2", Ashley was 4'11". Looking at the pictures of the other ones, they're not big people. Joanna Speaks, at the time of her disappearance, her build was thin. Now, why does this matter? It matters because the offender has to somehow get control over the victim. So picking a woman who is smaller is going to be less high risk for the subject. So for the offender, it's going to be less risk to him. They're going to be easier to control than, say, someone who's very muscular and is a martial arts master. One of the behaviors that tends not to change a lot, according to studies, over time among offenders is how they approach their victims and how they control their victims. But we don't have them actually connected yet. In respect to offender behavior, I'm just going to throw this out here in case it's helpful to somebody. One of the things that a lot of offenders do is test the victim's compliance first. So he might ask you for a light, ask you for $1, ask you what time it is, ask you, come here and talk to me to see if you'll comply. They want to see your response. And if a potential target is very compliant or very afraid or overly polite, that gives the offender information. It's okay to be rude. And if you're a guy who asks a woman for something and you're not testing her compliance, you just really want a light, or you want to know what time it is, or you want directions, if she doesn't answer you or if she's rude, you got to understand it's not necessarily personal about you. She needs to take care of herself. She doesn't know who you are. So don't take that stuff personally. If we look further at the victim characteristics of all of these victims, we'll see that they all had vulnerabilities of some sort. Well, yeah, that doesn't mean that the cases are connected, but it is something to consider. So the fact that they were all small, a lot of them had lost contact with their families. One had addictions for sure. Another was known to hang around a risky area. One had severe mental illness. Let's look at Kristin Smith. 22 years old, small. She was in a previous abusive relationship. Oh, hello. So right away, this brings up something else. The fact that this is all backwards. The way that people on social media are looking at this is backwards. So what's happened is they have seen a pattern, or what looks like a pattern, and said, oh my gosh, serial killer. And are going to look for evidence to support their theory rather than looking at the evidence and seeing where that evidence leads. Do you have to consider possibilities of linkages? Yes, of course you do. That's just part of it all. But rule out some of the obvious things first, right? Instead of jumping to this theory and then trying to make all the evidence fit. So that's one thing to keep in mind, that all of this, when you're hearing, oh my gosh, and here, this one is a redhead and that one's a redhead, or they were found, all within this certain time period. So it means, are they working backwards, trying to fit evidence to a theory? Or are they looking at the evidence and going from there? So in Miss Smith's case, her last contact with her family, November of 2022, and she wasn't reported missing until December of 2022. It looks like 3 weeks. And so what does that tell you? Nothing necessarily negative. It tells you that maybe it wasn't uncommon for her to be off doing her own thing, so it took some time for people to report her missing. Does that mean there's a serial killer or not a serial killer? No. In fact, serial offenders purposely target people that they think won't be missed. So this tells us that she might have been higher risk here. Kristin Smith was found February 18th, 2023. So from the time she's last seen or last known to be alive was November, and she's found in February. So out of this series, I already looked, out of this series, this is the first who passed away. So that matters. When she was found, her remains were skeletonized. So Oregon isn't freezing like it is up here. So, 3 or 4 months to be skeletonized outside, that's about right. And the news, one news article, is reporting that her death was accidental, or that it's being investigated as accidental. Let me see if I can find that. This is San Diego local news. This was reported May 26, 2023. So this is the one found in a forested area close to Southeast Deerdoff Road and Southeast Flavel Street in the Pleasant Valley neighborhood. The case is still under investigation. Her death is being handled as an accidental death, who have not indicated that it was suspicious in any way. So the investigation isn't complete, so that doesn't mean the fact that it's being investigated as an accident doesn't mean that they won't find something else to indicate otherwise. And I'm curious because the remains were skeletonized. So why are they thinking it was an accident? They have that information that hasn't been made public. So there's some reason that they think that. I don't know what it is, but the investigation is not over. So we might be able to eliminate this one. Then there was another bit of information about this. This is KGW 8, and this was reported on May 27th, 2023. And I'm going to play a part of this for you where they interview some neighbors in the area where she was found.
He says in February he was driving home when he noticed deputy cars at the intersection of Southeast Deerdorf Road and Southeast Flavel Street. Later, he learned Kristin Smith's remains were found in a field 2 months after she was reported missing. He says that land is owned by the David Douglas School District.
Unfortunate. I think that's really all I have to say about it. It's unfortunate.
The school district did not respond to our request for comment. Portland police are conducting a death investigation to learn how the Gresham woman died. They have not said if Smith's death is suspicious. Gonzalez and other neighbors say this incident makes them more concerned about the state of their neighborhood. They say people have been squatting in fields owned by the school district for years.
Probably late 2019, early 2020 it started.
So I want to make a comment about that, about the people who have been squatting here for years. There's I don't know, I guess it depends on what your thinking is in the first place. Some people will see that and think, oh, well, it was one of those squatters who did something bad. But think of this. If there are squatters there and you are a predator, well, that's a target-rich environment, isn't it? Right? It doesn't mean that one of the squatters did something bad. They're all at risk.
Peroy says something needs to be done to help people find shelter.
Rents are skyrocketing in this area. Houses are skyrocketing in this area. Some things should be more affordable. Housing's one of them.
Okay, so we know there's an area where there's squatters. We know that Kristin was found near that area. So she was found in that area that was just described. That's close to where the squatters were found. It is a sort of a wooded area, and it makes sense that people would try and live in tents there. I mean, if you're homeless, you're looking for a place to go to get away from the population, get off the street a little bit. So a field or a little forested area is a good spot to go. And we know that Kristin hung around Southeast 82nd Avenue. That's only 8 minutes away from where she was found. So it's not a wild idea to think that she walked there under her own steam or went with somebody for some reason, and that she did have an accident. Mind you, I'm not privy, none of us are privy to the information that the police have. So that investigation is not complete. So this is really up in the air unless there are other links to the other cases. She was high risk as a victim, low risk to the offender. I hope this is making sense to people when I'm saying this: high risk, low risk. It was out of character for her to not be in touch with her family, and so that prompted the missing person report. And she had a cell phone. So I'm really curious as to whether or not they found the cell phone and if they obtained data from that cell phone. But they're not saying too much. Joanna Speaks, 32 years old. She was a mom. One of the risk factors for her was that she struggled with addictions. She lost contact with her family in March. She was found in Ridgefield on an abandoned property in Clark County. So this was quite a ways away, and she didn't frequent that area. This does tell us something. The police said that they believe the body was moved. So there's a difference between moving a body or transporting a live victim and then killing them. So it looks like that this place was a dump site. It was a rural area, and interesting because, you know, if you go and dump a body on a property where there's a farm or where there are buildings, I mean, you're not going to want to do that if you know it's occupied. So it makes me wonder if the offender knew somehow that that place was abandoned, if he was familiar with the area. Here's the map of where she was found. There are businesses around, but it's pretty out of the way. And oh yeah, in a lot of these locations, there's Highway 5 that runs, either connects the places or runs fairly close by. So that could cause investigators to have a closer look. That is a thing that happens where an offender will be operating in several jurisdictions, and you'll notice that there's a particular highway that connects them all. So you'll have little clusters sort of around that highway, or, you know, people who were missing, people who were last seen at a truck stop or a place like a restaurant or something just off the highway, or people who are hitchhiking. So that is something to look at. But look at this area. It's pretty rural, and traffic going down this road here is fast. There wouldn't be much around here and wouldn't be much going on at night. So it would be an easy place to dump somebody. Does that mean it's a serial killer? Not necessarily. Could be an individual killer. We do know this victim, Joanna Speaks, is definitely a homicide. So we do know that. The cause of death was blunt force trauma to the head and neck. So that tells you something about offender behavior. So she has no connection to where she was found, but she frequents Gladstone and Milwaukee areas. And there was another person here who frequented Milwaukee, was Bridget Webster. They both frequented a similar area, but they were found like 2 hours apart. Ms. Webster was found in Polk County. There is a Highway 5 connection, but where she was actually found was 30 minutes from the highway. So it's not like an offender just hopped off the highway and put her there. There's also no indication of time of death for her and no indication of cause of death. So, they happen to frequent Milwaukee. That could be a lot of people. So let's go back to Joanna. So she was struggling with addictions. We know she was murdered. That's for sure. We have a cause of death. They moved the body, put it in a rural area, but it wasn't an area where the body was hidden in trees or in bushes or that sort of thing. It was just put outside of an abandoned building, and she was pretty easily found. That isn't the same sort of method of disposal as the other ones, if they were disposed of. But the geography is rural. And we don't know anything about her. I had questions like, was she walking or driving? Where was she staying? The police have asked the public, where is she staying? So obviously the family doesn't know where she was staying. And the police don't know where she was staying. She was known to frequent an area that was known for high fentanyl use. And this is Fox 12, Oregon. This was published April 18th, 2023. And I'm liking these ones that were published closer to the time of the incidents. They're not tainted by additional speculation. Yeah, it was police and fire rescue responded to a report of a dead person at a property. They knew the body was moved and it's being investigated as a homicide. So this gives you another indication that when the police go to a scene, there are all kinds of things that can tell you, things about the body and things about the scene that can tell you whether a body was moved or not. I mean, they can even tell you if the body was just flipped over, because post-mortem lividity alone will tell you that. So I think sometimes the investigators don't get enough credit from the public for actually knowing maybe what to look for and whatnot. So let's see, does she have anything in common with Kristin Smith? So she's 10 years older, thin, both kind of redhead, both white, both in precarious situations. They were found in completely different places. One was a homicide for sure. The other one is being investigated as an accident. One was found in a rural area, but not hidden, right? The other was found in a wooded area, but not way off in the boonies. It's only 8 minutes away from where she was hanging out, and it was on school property. And was the body actually hidden in the foliage? I mean, it must have been somewhat, because they didn't find her for months, but they're different. In one case, the body was obviously moved. The other case, she could have walked there. So I don't know. I'm not seeing any connection. Now, remember, we have hardly any information. I think part of my point here is the fact that we do, as the public, we do have hardly any information. And so speculating and causing people to be upset and afraid isn't all that helpful. Let's look at Charity Perry. She is 24 years old, white female, and we know hardly anything about her. She was found April 24th. This is the same month as the homicide, but in a different place, right? So she's found in a culvert. She had severe mental illness. So that means that she was vulnerable. She also was known to frequent high drug areas, which is a target-rich environment for a predator. Does that mean it's a serial killer? No. There's lots of predators who go to target-rich environments. Also, when you go to a high drug area or a high, sort of generally high crime area, there are lots of potential offenders there and lots of bad things that can happen. So there's just not enough here. There's just not enough information here to say whether or not she's linked to the others, whether or not she's a victim of a serial killer. We don't know why she ended up in a culvert. We don't know what the cause of death was. Certainly the police have to investigate. That's their job. It's a sudden, unexpected death of somebody who's only 24 years old. So, yeah, they have to investigate. I'm not seeing like a missing person report or anything. So, there's just not enough information yet to make a conclusion. So that's back to what the police were saying in their statement. There's not enough information at this time. The facts don't support the theory at this time. So we don't know what happened to her, right? We have nothing. We have no information. She was found in a culvert. She had mental illness, and she was known to frequent a dangerous area. So, I mean, it's just not enough to make a conclusion on. We don't even know if it's a homicide. The fact that you're found in a culvert, somebody's found in a culvert, could be accident, could be a homicide, could be medical issue, it could be all sorts of things, right? It doesn't have to be a serial killer. Bridget Webster, 31, same build, white, from Milwaukee. We talked about this. She was found in Polk County. We don't have a cause of death. She was known to frequent Portland, including Oregon City and Milwaukee. And I already said that there was the other one, that's the confirmed homicide, known to frequent Milwaukee. That by itself is not enough to make a conclusion. It's interesting, but it's not enough to make a conclusion. So we don't really know much about her. We don't know if she had a car. We don't know anything. So how do you take this and say, well, it's connected? Geography alone is not enough. So we don't know if this is even a homicide. We know it's a sudden, unexpected death, right? She's only 31 years old. So, I mean, there's nothing in the news or in what police are reporting to say, oh, her body was moved. There's just, like, there's nothing here. You guys, there's nothing here. I can't even speculate on anything because there's just not enough information. Maybe more will come out. Ashley Real, 22 years old, very thin, Hispanic. So the other women were all white. She had black hair. I saw surveillance footage of her. She was casual, but dressed well. She was last seen on March 27th. And she was also on the same day, she was seen at the Gateway Transit Center, but police didn't issue a press release looking for her until April. So that makes me wonder why. But then she was found in May. So she might have been missing, like something might have happened to her already in March. So she was found Southeast Judd Road near Eagle Creek, Clackamas County, in a wooded area, 30 minutes from Highway 5. They're saying the death was suspicious, but they're not sure if it's a homicide or not. But here's the thing that I noticed. She was seen at the Transit Center Max station on Northeast Multnomah Street. The place she was last seen last confirmed to be seen was somewhere else, but she was known to go to this transit station, and so was Kristin Smith. Now that's a very specific place. There was another, these two over here. Oh, they both went to the Milwaukee areas. Well, it's kind of a big space. That's kind of vague. But this transit center is not so vague. So that's interesting. That doesn't mean they're connected, but it's interesting. So both Kristin Smith and Ashley Real were known to be at this Gateway Max station, okay? One of them was found down here. So this is Highway 205. So one was found here and the other was found here. So the furthest distance is 45 minutes. So if this was the same person, the person had a vehicle, right? I mean, if all of these cases were connected, and I don't think they are, guys, if they were all connected, then the offender would have to have a vehicle. The offender would also have to be able to fit in well enough to not raise suspicion, to not be really noticed by the people in the community, and would have to know all these rural back roads, would have to have the social skills and the demeanor, the way he presents himself, to convince victims to go with him. Is it possible that the same offender took both these women or spotted these women at that Gateway transit station? Are any of the other victims connected in any way to that transit station? Or is it just a coincidence? Because a lot of people will go to a transit station because we're talking about downtown in a big, like a well-populated place. A lot of people go there. Ashley was seen at, I have surveillance photos. Ashley was seen at a restaurant. This is from police. She was seen at a fast food restaurant, Southeast Division Street on March 27th. And may also have been at that Gateway Transit Center on the same day. So that's interesting between those two victims. I'm not saying that means they're connected, right? But we do have Ashley and Kristin. And let's see how far apart they are. Missing, so Kristin missing in November. Ashley last seen in March. See, that actually makes more sense than if it was connected. That would actually make more sense to me than these, one after another, almost every week, right? Because a serial killer who is operating in a smaller area, who's escalated to the point where they're killing one person a week, well, either there's a trigger happening in their life, or they've been operating for a really long time and nobody noticed, and there were no other bodies. And so that this idea of this serial killer, killing one person a week just doesn't hang. I'm sorry. But these two are interesting. And for both of them, police haven't really released a cause of death, not confirming homicide. One, they're saying, well, it might be an accident. So that one is interesting, but there's still not enough to say, oh yeah, they're connected. We still don't know, as members of the public, we don't even know if they were homicides. With Ashley, I don't know if she was transient. I don't know if she had a car, right? Like, we don't know anything about her. We don't know whether she was involved in a bad relationship, we don't know anything. We don't know anything. You can't, I could take this and make it mean all kinds of things. It's just not enough, guys. There's just not enough here. So basically, we have two cases where both women went to a very specific place. Let's look at those two. Kristin Smith and Ashley Reel. For both of them, so same age, same build, both seen at the same place shortly before they were missing. So that's definitely interesting. Both found in a wooded area, but Smith also hung out closer to where she was found. So we don't know. It's not enough. It's not enough. It's not enough, but it's interesting. It sounds like both of them had some risk factors. I don't know anything about subject behaviors because we don't have evidence. But the offender, in any event, if there was an offender, if these are homicides, because they haven't been deemed homicides, if they're connected, if they're homicides, then the offender would be somebody who is mobile, probably a white guy, and who would not scare them away. I think the presence of the squatters in the one neighborhood, I don't think it's the squatters that are causing the risk. I think it's the squatters who are vulnerable, and an offender would be drawn to vulnerable people. The only one out of all these, that is for sure a homicide is Joanna Speaks. And for that one, we know that the body was moved, that there was blunt force trauma, that she was vulnerable. But you know, the fact that she was vulnerable is, I mean, really common across victims. So that's not enough to connect them. There were 2 unsolved cases that went into VICAP in Clackamas County that were both blunt force trauma of the way they were killed. The body wasn't hidden. It was rural, but it wasn't covered up by bushes or anything. So, guys, we don't have enough. The only thing that really is standing out to me is the very specific place that 2 of the victims went. That's it. And of those 2, they're not necessarily homicides. We don't know. So I've been kind of rambling on for God knows how long. What I'm saying to you is, in essence, what the police are saying, which is there's not enough evidence. And you can't take one thing and say, oh, that's it, it's a serial killer. Do you know who to talk to? Do you know how you're going to find out? You talk to the people on the street in these areas where people have gone missing. They know. They know what's going on out there. They know that if something's going on, if people are going missing, right? Are there a lot of missing persons reports out of these areas? Are there a lot of, so we're talking about where they actually found a victim. Are there a lot of, an unusual number of missing people in those particular areas over the last, say, 8 months, a year? We're not hearing that. So, you know, we have speculation. And, you know, when you investigate anything, I mean, you look at the most obvious things first. You don't expand your field out into the wide world when, you know, it was probably the husband or whatever, right? Like, you have to, you go with what you've got. A serial killer headline is a great, it's great for clicks and ads. But, you know, it makes people unnecessarily afraid. If there is somebody operating in the Portland area, actually, let me rephrase. At any given time, whether it's a serial offender or not, at any given time in any populated area, there are predators. That's the way it is. And whether there's a serial killer in the news that you know about or not, it's important to, you know, take precautions to keep yourself safe. Take precautions to keep your community safe. Put structures in place that will help people who are vulnerable, like homeless people. So whether the police come out and say, oh yeah, they're connected or not, doesn't mean that you're not going to be careful. It shouldn't mean that you're going to be somehow less careful. I mean, every predator out there is just waiting for somebody to not be careful for a minute. It doesn't mean, because if there's no If there's no serial killer operating, it doesn't mean everything's fine and cool, everything's safe. And if there is one, it doesn't mean that person, that offender is coming for you in particular. I mean, wherever we are, whether you're in Portland or whether you're in Canada, wherever you are, I mean, we need to do things to make our communities safer. And so I think it's okay to watch out for other people. You know, when I see a kid or an attractive woman walking down the street, I look around at who else is looking at that woman or that kid. You can do that. Being aware. Who else is watching in the environment? You can do things like, I'm not going to show myself to be a compliant victim. You can decide that you're not going to feel guilty if you're not perfectly nice and polite to strangers who approach you. You can decide that you're not getting in anybody's car. I mean, and if something, you know, I could talk about, oh, these are the things you can do for target hardening and things to watch out for. And yes, that's true. But every situation is different. And there's always that. I'm always worried that people who have been victimized will feel like, oh gosh, I did something wrong. It's my fault because I didn't lock the door, or I didn't do this safety advice or whatever. And the fact of the matter is that, yeah, there are ways you can target harden, but if a predator offends, it's not the victim's fault, ever. It's the fault of the person who did the victimizing, right? So sometimes these, safety tips can feel like or be construed as or used as ways to blame victims. Well, why did you go down that street? Why do you have addictions? Why are you vulnerable? When the responsibility is on other people to, like, look, if somebody's vulnerable, it doesn't mean you can go and victimize them. So yes, there are things you can do. Trust your gut, right? We're taught to be polite. We're taught to override our gut. If you're in a situation where you're actually safe, then you can sit and ponder, what is it my gut is trying to tell me? And how accurate is that? If you're in a safe place, you can do that. But if you're out in the wild, right? Like if you're out on the street or somewhere where you're not necessarily safe, or you're interacting with somebody, if your gut is telling you something's not right, I don't know what it is, but something's not right, then listen to that. And watch out for other people. Look around. Who's vulnerable, and who is watching who is vulnerable. I'm going to have to cut this thing up so much. I don't know if it's going to make it into a video, because I feel like, I've sort of gone through all these things to say. There's nothing to say because there's not enough evidence. So the best I can do, if I don't give you like this really weirdly chopped up video, is say to you, look at the evidence and let the evidence lead you. Don't try and have a conclusion and then force the evidence into that. Yes, there yes, there are predators out there. And whether it's a serial offender or just a whole lot of other offenders, it's still important to try and stay safe and trying to keep people around you safe and trust your gut. Thanks for listening.